Well, the effects of a global pandemic and the resultant job losses have culminated in a high case number of depression and even suicide. Social media also means that people are susceptible to cyberbullying, which is a known threat to mental health. For more on this, we're joined by clinical psychologist Jolyn Durant. Jolyn, a very good evening to you. Welcome to the program, and thank you for being on News at Prime. Let's talk about the sort of pressure first that the pandemic has put on people, and then the layer that's added by the difficulty that includes the loss of a job, for instance.
Thank you for having me. Yes, with what the pandemic has caused is people have moved more into cyberspace. So people work in cyberspace, people live in cyberspace, and the isolation that has happened has made it a very important part of our lives. But the downside of it is when somebody is, and I'm specifically talking about the bullies, when they are in an invisible space, they're sitting in a double layer of removal from the person who's the victim. So they have more freedom or more boldness in what they do in their bullying. So they would say things and do things that people would normally say in a face-to-face bullying situation, for example. So in terms of the younger generation, they have a lot of emphasis on fitting in and being part of a community, and they have moved into the cyber community to offer them that. And that is their safe space. And for them, their cyber reputation is also very important. So these are all aspects that become part of people's identity and how people relate to the world. And when bullying happens in that space, one, because it's invisible, it is exponentially worse. And two, the invisibility also affects the victim, because as the victim, you have no idea how far the story has gone. So with the click of a button, the shares happen instantaneously, and you have no clue who has seen your pictures or who knows what's going on in this bullying situation. So if we add the layer of depression, and we look at the levels where depression play out in somebody's life. Depression affects people's behavior. So people will withdraw and isolate themselves, and they will stop taking part in connective activities with the people in their lives, or activities that bring balance and allow them to relate to all aspects of life, not just the negative parts of life. The second layer of depression happens in the emotional space, where people feel worthless or helpless, or people feel like a burden, or they feel not good enough. And then the third layer where depression plays out is in people's thought processes. So people start thinking in a very pessimistic, negative way, sometimes in a very all or nothing thinking way. This is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. I can't deal with this. And if we look at where bullying then comes in, is it hits you on all three of those layers, because it plays into the I feel worthless, or I have nobody I can trust, and the thought processes. So the depression just amplifies the effect, because you have no one to bounce these ideas off, you have no support, and you have no perspective in how to deal with it.
How then do we address it? Is it as easy as curating our timelines, limiting the number of people who can access your account?
I don't think it's as easy as that. I think what is important is parents need to be more involved in what their children access. And it's a difficult thing, because the amount of forums and apps and TikTok and all the latest trends, it just develops so fast, parents can't keep up. So parents need to be very involved in their children's lives to notice whether they notice any differences in behavior, whether the kids start acting differently, whether they change their eating or sleeping habits, whether they start posting more dark stuff, or whether they start withdrawing. They need to be involved to see that. I think also that there are a lot of fallacies that people have around what depression is and what suicide is. and what leads to suicide. So people are very hesitant when they notice somebody is battling to actually initiate a conversation because they don't know what to say, or they might plant an idea. So people would not initiate a conversation when somebody starts talking about suicidal ideation because they think they might trigger something that wasn't there to start off with. And these are all fallacies.
So, Jolyn, I'm wondering if many of these signs are easier to spot in children, because you were giving us tips of how to spot, for example, withdrawal in children if they post different content and it's getting darker as a sign that perhaps something is wrong. But with adults, is it perhaps much more difficult? Because there is also, after a certain age, an expectation, an unfair expectation that you should be able to take online abuse.
Yes, for sure. And we have another layer, as we have this thing in South Africa: cowboys don't cry, or tigers don't cry. And the facade that I have to look like I am fine and I have to look like I'm in control, and to have to admit to somebody that I'm not coping is still a shame, and there is still a lot of stigma around it. But in adults, you can also notice differences when people start changing their eating patterns or their sleeping patterns, so sleeping much more, sleeping much less, or withdrawing from their friend circles. So people have different ways. Depression masks itself very often in anger and irritability. So somebody who would normally be a very calm person suddenly starts doing a lot of road rage or anger outbursts, or when people start behaving out of character, one should really start having a look at what's going on and initiating a connection with people, specifically when they start withdrawing themselves.
And say I've been bullied, right? How do I know if what I'm feeling has gone from just sadness and offense because of ill treatment by others to something as serious as depression?
Our measure is always to have a look at how it impacts your life. When it starts having an influence at your job, so for instance, your motivation levels or your productivity, or you start avoiding or being late, or the absenteeism that happens. When it starts impacting your close relationships, when you start withdrawing or not connecting or not wanting to share your vulnerability with your intimate partner, when you start withdrawing from other activities that used to provide you with a sense of meaning and a sense of fulfillment in life. When it impacts the areas of your life, then you should have a look. Because a moment of sadness is not going to have an impact on all the other areas of your life.
Jolyn Durant, good to speak to you. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.